I'm honored to have you here, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello, dear viewers. Get ready to expand your horizons as we delve into English relative words. The English relative words are words in English used to mark a clause, noun phrase or preposition phrase as relative. The central relative words in English include who, whom, whose, which, why, and while, as shown in the following examples, each of which has the relative clause in bold. Thou should celebrate the things which we hold dear. I've been studying hard, which explains my good grades. I finally met Jordan, who had been away. That's the reason why it works. Most also belong to the set of English interrogative words but function differently as relative words. The subordinator that is widely regarded as a relative word, though one with different properties from the others. Now, let's delve into the intricacies of semantics and explore its various aspects. Semantically speaking, relative words typically refer to some antecedent in the containing phrase or clause. For example, who within a teacher of mine who likes apples does not question the identity of a person, but rather refers to the teacher of mine, which in turn denotes some particular person. Our focus now turns to individual words, an important aspect of our discussion. Who with whom primarily refers to persons, although it can also refer to other animate beings. Whose, however, may also refer to non-persons, as in a book whose cover is missing, which is semantically the most flexible, taking a wide range of antecedents, including prepositions, as in I've skipped a lot of classes, which is why I flunked. A clear exception is reference to persons, usually ungrammatical as in they're the people which I know. This is not absolute, though, as shown by the example I told her Lee was a friend, which he was. Arguably, this use refers to the person's position or the relation, rather than to the person himself. Where refers primarily to locations, but locations broadly conceived, including locations in time, e.g., a time where we have to take that a step forward, and situations, e.g., a situation where we'll need to rethink things. When refers primarily to times and situations. While refers to a period of time. Whence formal and somewhat archaic refers to a place broadly conceived, and in such sentences as she returned to the house whence she had come has a from meaning. Yet examples such as she returned to the house from whence she had come are common. Whither distinctly archaic is similar but whither to meaning. The contrast with whence is not straightforward in that to whither is ungrammatical. Why refers primarily to reasons, as a fused relative, and in some non-standard English dialects more widely, what is general purpose other than for persons, and how refers to method. More or less archaic and formal compounds of where and a preposition. Wherefore means after which, e.g., at the account anniversary, card purchases will revert to 0.5% cashback until total card spending reaches £15,000 sterling, wherefore 1% cashback will be earned again. Where it means at which, e.g., a director, notwithstanding his interest, may be counted in the quorum present at any meeting of the directors whereat he or any other director is appointed to hold any such office or place of profit under the company. Whereby means by which or as a result of which, e.g., this is a new process whereby a work coach will decide what further work search conditions or employment pathways would best support a claimant into work. Wherefrom means from which, e.g., you could always count on her to jump up, dance, clap, cry, and uncork the mind hydrants wherefrom her praise gushed. Wherein means in which, e.g., MIT is a phenomenon wherein an insulator becomes capable of conducting electricity when subjected to external factors like changes in the concentration or temperature of an ambient gas. Wheref means of which, e.g., the results whereof tell a story of some win some loss. Wherein means on which, e.g., and yet today the dead earth is revived by sunbeams wherein she hangs her cloak. Wherito means to which, e.g., the initiation of contempt proceedings was filed against Union of India and others, pursuant wherito 45 days time was given to contemner to publish the already approved Laws of Cantonment Board, Jammu. Whereupon means upon which or immediately after which, e.g., A fine hometown debut from the Seamer Britain cast denied New Zealand any momentum despite a misleadingly run-laden first over from Finn Allen, whereupon a brace of forceful knocks from Dowd Malan and the inevitable Harry Brook allowed Joe's butler to sit back in the dressing room with his feet up. Wherewith means with which the key to real social change, they wrote, was nothing less than vesting in the citizenry the means and the effective power wherewith to criticize, to shape, and even to challenge the actions or proposed actions of officials. All of the words may have singular or plural antecedents. For example, the customer who was cheated, customers who were cheated. That differs from the other relative words in that, like other subordinators, it lacks semantic content, referring or otherwise. In this section, we'll be peeling back the layers of lexical categories and syntactic functions to reveal its true essence. Each relative word also has a syntactic function in a phrase or clause. For example, in the person who arrived, who functions as the subject of the relative clause. Different words have different functions depending on their lexical category and form. For example, while a plain pronoun like who may typically function as a subject or object, its genitive form functions only as a determiner, e.g., the person I found. In this section, we'll be deep diving into syntax, unraveling its complexities and uncovering valuable insights. A relative word occurs within a relative phrase, which appears in clause initial position. A simple relative phrase consists of a relative word by itself, where within the restaurant where we dined, who within the man who you introduced me to. A complex relative phrase also has other material. It is exemplified by to whom within the man to whom you introduced me, from under which within the rock from under which it had crawled, and whose car within the man whose car you borrowed. With our foundation established, it's time to explore individual words in relative clauses and its relevance to our overarching theme. Who with its other forms whom and whose is a pronoun. Whose is the genitive form of who. Whom is an accusative form generally limited to careful or formal writing or speech and thus still commoner with preposition fronting the employee to whom it was addressed, compared the informal the employee whom it was addressed to, with preposition stranding, and who is the nominative or other than formally the plain form. Whom is also found as a hypercorrected nominative. It has been claimed that whose cannot form a simple relative phrase, but the Oxford English Dictionary disagrees, citing, for example, everything depends on the person whose this administration is, which is usually a pronoun. It is a determiner in cases like we pause for 3 weeks, after which time we will restart. Where, when, and while are prepositions. Why is an adverb? That often mistakenly called a relative pronoun is a subordinator. In most contexts, it is omissible. Thus, I've said all the things that I want to say. She's the one that you met last week. That's the reason that it works. But it is not omissible in standard English when the relativized element is the subject of the relative clause. The speech that enraged them was racist, when the subject of the relative clause does not immediately follow that the book that during the flight I'd read was most absorbing, or for a supplementary relative where relatives are anyway far commoner. In some non-standard dialects, what a pronoun and how an adverb are used for relative clauses, e.g., that's the thing what we've been missing, that's the way how to do it. Whereupon and the other word plus preposition compounds are themselves prepositions. In this part of the video, we'll be delving deeper into fused relatives and analyzing its key components. A fused construction is one in which a word or phrase has two functions at once. A simple type of fused construction, not a relative, is exemplified by any within I didn't notice any, although a noun phrase such as any food is normally headed by a noun, and although any is normally as in any food a dependent, within I didn't notice any it heads a noun phrase and thus functions as a fused dependent head. Similarly, a fused relative is a noun phrase or preposition phrase, not a clause, but containing one that is headed by a relative phrase, most commonly by a simple relative phrase, and thus by a relative word alone, and that lacks an antecedent. For example, the fused relative construction who you want within believe who you want contains the relative phrase who. This has functions within both the NP that contains the relative clause and within the relative clause itself, functions that are fused. The fused relative is also called a free relative clause, nominal relative clause, and independent relative clause. In the upcoming section, we'll be shining a light on fused relatives with relative words without ever. A fused relative may be headed by a non-compound word, such as what, by a preposition compound, or by a compound with ever. The three kinds are considered in turn. Let's transition to individual non-compound words in fused relatives and uncover its significance. Who, as in you can believe who you want. But this is archaic with who as the subject in the relative clause. Who steals my purse steals trash was used by Shakespeare, and survives in the expression can I help who's next. But you can believe who told you is not used today. Whom, as in you can believe whom you want. Whose, as in you can believe whose version you want. Which, as in you can believe which version you want. Like who, this is not used as the subject in the relative clause, use which is handy. When, as in we arrived when it opened. Where, as in my phone wasn't where I'd left it. While, as in we arrived while the band was playing. Whence rather archaic, as in he returned whence he had come. With a distinctly archaic, as in he goes whither he wants. Why, as in why I resigned was because of the chairman's intransigence. Use infused relatives of why seems to be limited to pseudo-clefts. What, as in they ate what was offered. Examples with what as a determiner, such as they ate what food was offered and they considered what options were open to them, imply a small quantity or number. How, as in you can dress how you like. In the upcoming section, we'll be dissecting individual preposition words in fused relatives and exploring its implications in greater detail. Individual preposition words in fused relative sheriff is widely used, particularly with the verb speak. The mayor, 35, knows whereof she speaks, perhaps best known from the final proposition within Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus in its first English translation, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. In this section, we'll be deep diving into individual other words in fused relatives, unraveling its complexities and uncovering valuable insights. However, as in I cursed whoever had taken it. Whomever, as in I borrow from whomever I can, although this would be a less likely alternative to I borrow from whoever I can. Whoever's, whosoever, as in the gang will steal whoever's whosoever car they can. Whichever, as in by whichever you like, by whichever vase you like. Whenever, as in we go whenever we can. Wherever, as in there were ants wherever we looked. Whatever, as in by whatever you like, by whatever vase furniture you like. However, as in however it happened, fix it. However unfair it seems, fix it. As we enter this new phase, let's analyze sover and so relative words from different angles and evaluate its significance. As relative words, forms ending sover and so are old-fashioned variants of the ever forms. There are whosoever, whomsoever, whysoever, whensoever and whatsoever, and the archaisms whensoever and whithersoever are still occasionally found. Prepare yourself for an eye-opening discussion on etymology in the upcoming portion of this video. Ultimately, the English interrogative words, those beginning with in addition to the word how, derive from the Proto-Indo-European root qua orqui, the former of which was reflected in Proto-Germanic as orqua due to Grimm's law. These underwent further sound changes and spelling changes, notably cluster reductions, resulting in the initial sound being either in most dialects or how, who, and the initial spelling being either or how. This was the result of two sound changes before how, who and otherwise, and the spelling change from to in Middle English. The unusual pronunciation versus spelling of who is because the vowel was formerly, and thus it did not undergo the sound change in Old English, but in Middle English following spelling change the vowel changed to and it followed the same sound change as how before it, but with the Middle English spelling unchanged. In how Old English, from Proto-Germanic war, the W merged into the lave of the word, as it did in Old Frisian, Dutch ho-how, but it can still be seen in Old Saxon hu, Old High German we how. In English, the gradual change of voiceless stops into voiceless fricatives phase 1 of Grimm's law during the development of Germanic languages is responsible for with interrogatives. Although some varieties of American English and various Scottish dialects still preserve the original sound, i.e. rather than, most have only the words who, whom, whose, what and why can all be considered to come from a single Old English word hue, reflecting its masculine and feminine nominative hue, dative whom, genitive hus, neuter nominative and accusative hute, and instrumental masculine and neuter singular hue, later hue respectively. Other interrogative words, such as which, how, where, whence, or whither, derived either from compounds which coming from a compound of hue and lick, or other words from the same root how deriving from. As we venture forward, let's examine pronunciation of initial digraphs in detail and gain a deeper appreciation for its significance. The pronunciation of English relative words starting with the digraph involves a phonetic element historically pronounced as and now variously realized as or. Speakers with the wine merger generally use, resulting in words like which and why being pronounced with an initial sound, homophonous with which and why. The pronunciation is preserved in conservative speech in the southern United States, in certain Scottish English varieties, and elsewhere. However, the merged pronunciation has been identified as having a continuous lineage in everyday spoken Southern English from Old English to the present. 3 factors have been highlighted in enabling this phonetic evolution: spelling, word frequency, and possibly a shift in the sociolinguistic status of the northern pronunciation in some circles in the South during the 16th and 17th centuries. The initial id in that represents a voiced dental fricative, phonologically distinguishing it from other relative words. In the upcoming section, we'll be dissecting vowel sounds and exploring its intricate connections to our topic. Outside of fused relatives, relative words have unstressed pronunciation. The vowel sounds in English relative words vary, with some notable features. 1. Diphthongs and monophthongs. Words like who and whose contain a monophthong, while others like way incorporate a diphthong. 2. Schwa and reduction. The vowels in some relative words like which can reduce to schwa. As a relative word, the subordinator that has only the unstressed pronunciation. Turning our focus to intonational phrasing, let's explore its key elements. Supplementary relative clauses regularly form a separate prosodic unit, with a pause before the relative phrase, while integrated relatives do not. Get ready for an exciting exploration as we unravel the mysteries of relative versus interrogative and other words. There is significant overlap between the English relative words and the English interrogative words, but the relative words that and while are not interrogative words. The interrogative words whether and if are not relative words, and, in standard English, what and how are mostly excluded from the relative words. Most or all of the interrogative words that are now more or less archaic are also relative words. The denotation of whose as an interrogative word is limited to persons, but the relative whose may denote non-persons, as in a book whose cover is missing. Fused relatives are easily confused with open interrogatives, and even a careful analysis may conclude that, if taken out of context, a particular sentence can have either of 2 interpretations. An example in the Cambridge Grammar of the English language illustrating this ambiguity is what she wrote is completely unclear. If we know what she wrote and are saying that it is hard to understand, then what she wrote is a fused relative. If on the other hand we are saying that the extent of her authorship is unknown, then what she wrote is an open interrogative content clause. The preposition while also has other, relative irrelevant uses. While she showered, I slept time. While the maths exam was tough, the English exam was easy. Contrast. While you're free to complain, doing so won't get you anywhere. Concession. As a relative word, the subordinator that has only the unstressed pronunciation. It is also used more generally with subordinate clauses. I know that he's lying and is usually unstressed, but in some contexts necessarily stressed. That he's lying is obvious. The stress that has the plural form those I'll take that is a determiner. The use-infused relatives of the ever form should not be confused with its other, non-relative use interrogative words modified by ever, as in whatever possessed you to do that. NPI whatever, which can be a postnominal intensifier as can whatsoever, which in this use is not archaic. I was left with no money whatever whatsoever. However, as an adverb of comparison. Free choice ever, an interrogative word in an exhaustive conditional construction, one whose protasis encompasses all possibilities, such as wherever he went, Bhutan thrilled him. A whereabouts seems only to be used as a noun, perhaps as a singular form of whereabouts meaning place understood as a plural, whereas has a meaning close to that of although. Wherefore is an archaic interrogative word meaning why. Some of the preposition relative words listed above may also appear as more or less archaic interrogative words. Your feedback helps me improve, so please take a moment to leave a comment or review.